Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you for another Film Fanatic show. It is Friday. Happy TGIF. It's 10:46. So yeah, I've been loving and digging all things Western lately. A lot of the videos, well, pretty much all of the videos coming coming your way for this channel has been. I've been covering all kinds of Western movies. I got this really awesome collection about a month ago of 20 great westerns. It's called Heroes and Bandits. It's got 20 movies on it, which is insane. It's about 4 discs. It's all DVDs. The quality's not great, but actually, last night's movie was really, really good. The quality was awesome. But for the most part, these are they feel like they're kind of burnt, duplicated versions of DVDs, like maybe second or third generation versions of the film. So the quality for most of these movies is not very, very good. But the thing that's really awesome is I am on my I think I'm on my sixth movie, or seventh movie. I haven't seen any of these movies. This is my first time seeing any of these movies, and it's been really, really great. And I think that today's show is on the case of I probably spoke a little too soon as far as movies that I thought were, the best. Today, I'm going to be covering Hellbinders from 1967. This is probably, again, I shouldn't say this because I have quite a ways to go with checking out these movies. But this today's show is going to be on the Hellbinders from 1967. It's an Italian spaghetti western exploitation movie. This movie was so dark, so incredibly dark, and so incredibly violent. Yeah, I was kind of blown away by this movie. It was directed by Sergio Corbucci, who is a name in the world of Western, in the world of spaghetti westerns or Italian exploitation movies that I am familiar with and that I have heard, that I had heard of. A lot of these other films, well, all of these other films I had never seen before, and there were two other Italian films in this collection so far of movies that I've covered. But this was Sergio Corbucci's the first director that I am familiar with because I know he did a bunch of Italian films back in the 60s and I believe in the 70s. It was pretty prolific. And yeah, he was an Italian director and screenwriter. And again, like I said, he is he was the only name I was really familiar with. He did he directed Django from 1960 1966, The Great Silence in 1968, The Mercenary in 1968. I mean, really prolific. That's one thing you gotta give credit to is some of these Italian directors and a lot of these exploitation directors. I mean, granted they had a lot less money to work with, but man, they fucking cranked out movies like it's wild. Odds and Evens from 78, Navajo Joe in 68, Superfuzz in 1980. It's crazy. Hellbenders. I think I've seen some of his other films. The Specialist in '69, The Con Artist in 75 or 76. Hellbinders is it came out in 67, like I said before, but this movie is just so incredibly badass. It's interesting because I've been watching a lot of old school, westerns, and again, I've mentioned it before in another video, in probably the last video or the last two videos, where when I'm into a certain style or genre, I really love to kind of like trace it back, to see where, some of these, maybe where the style kind of originated from. And especially around westerns. I've done that. I've taken that deep dive and kind of explored a particular genre, where I've gone that extra mile and really kind of, really tried to study a particular style. I've done that quite a few times, with action movies or with definitely spent a lot of time, two subjects that are, as far as films go, that are really close to my heart are practical effects in horror movies, especially, and the slasher genre. And I've taken that deep dive where I've, really, I just love really good, imaginative, practical effects in films. And my favorite, subgenre in the world of exploitation movies is the slasher genre. So I've spent a lot of time kind of researching and digging and buying a lot of movies where I've traced back that lineage and realized, wow, it goes back way further than I thought. And through that process, I've discovered it. Well, it's opened up so many doors, opened up a lot of different, and it exposed me to so many new directors. And the best thing is it's exposed me to, hit me to a lot of movies that I never knew about. And that's what I've been doing with westerns because I've always loved westerns. I mean, my dad always watched westerns when I was a kid. A lot of John Ford movies, John Wayne movies. He was a big Clint Eastwood fan. But I remember distinctly, watching, movies like Pale Rider as a kid. I remember in high school when The Unforgiven came out, which is probably, pound for pound, is probably my favorite Western of all time. I think that's of course, directed by Clint Eastwood. And I think that movie, came at a real special time and special place. I remember that film when it came out when I was in high school. And that was like, I had seen Westerns, growing up, through my dad, watching a lot of John Ford films and John Wayne movies and various other, American Westerns. But I remember as a kid seeing, as a teenager seeing The Unforgiven, and that movie just really blew me away. And that's what really made me a fan of Westerns. And I've bought that on Blu-ray, and I think I'm going to, after I get through all of these, I might, I don't know, if I'm not, after 20 Westerns in a row, if I'm not sick, well, I can't say that, but if I'm not like kind of burnt out from watching Westerns, I might just continue on and keep this whole thing going where I'm just going to continue to cover all of the other Westerns that I have, because I have quite a few. So we'll see how that goes. I don't have any fatigue around watching all of these Westerns consecutively yet. I mean, I feel like I'm getting into it actually more and more. So I'm thinking of maybe, doing that where I can extend this whole series to even more movies, all Westerns, and do another kind of show on The Unforgiven, which I have covered before. But the thing that was funny too growing up was my dad never really liked the Italian spaghetti westerns. He always thought those were like kind of just cheap, crappy knockoffs. He didn't really like he didn't like the dubbed, acting and all of these things, and that they were obviously way more low budget. And that's I don't know, that was just a thing. But around the time that I was, well, for me, for film, discovering movies, again, I grew up watching films, grew up, watching horror films, and always loved them from my earliest, when I think back to my earliest memories or parts of my childhood. Film and movies were always a big part of my childhood. But it wasn't until I was in, when I went to college, and around that time, I had, two friends, my friend Sean Russell and Charles Hendrick, who were big time movie buffs, and those guys really, for me, kind of brought me more into getting it. Well, just getting they got me more into film basically, and around when I was in my 20s, and pretty much like probably after I was in my early 20s, and when I was finished with school and college, when I got out of college, that was right around the time I started buying movies. I started, that was when I first kind of started collecting movies, and at that time it was all, DVDs, and I got my first DVD player and my first little surround sound system. Got my first, collection of DVDs going, and that's kind of where it started. And it was around that time, in my 20s, when I first started to see, when I was first exposed to Sergio Leone films, a lot of the spaghetti western movies that, with Clint Eastwood. And that was like my introduction. And I've said that before, that Sergio Leone to me is like what Dario Argento is to horror, where pretty much everybody who is into film is aware of him as a director. You don't have to. I mean, the world of Italian exploitation and spaghetti westerns, like, it's a massive world. There's like, there are tons of directors, tons of people making those films in the '60s and '70s, obviously, and even into the '80s. But Sergio Leone was so popular that it kind of crossed those boundaries, and even if a person wasn't really, took that deep dive into that amazing genre, you would know who that was. And I feel like, you know, the same thing for me as like with Dario Argento. Like, his name was so universally known that, you know, if a person or fan of film, or the horror genre, when it comes to Dario Argento, a person might not have taken that deep dive and explored that world, and how, just so many amazing directors came out of that time period. You would still know, that person would still probably know, Dario Argento, mainly because of the success of Suspiria. And Sergio Leone too. The same thing. Once Upon a Time in the West, and all of those films that he did with Clint Eastwood. Just iconic films. But both those directors, I feel, are household names. So, and the thing that I've been doing is, really trying to explore where the kind of the art form of the genre, originated from, that encapsulates the Western genre, and it's been really cool. I've been, it's a genre I've always loved. I've gotten further and further into it, and when it comes to the Italian kind of exploitive version of the Western genre, that is like one genre I've been wanting to really dive into, because that, again, exploitation movies are my favorite movies. So it's kind of just a natural thing for me to like dive deeper into that. And I've seen a lot of Italian horror, or sorry, Italian westerns, but I feel like I haven't, like, I don't own enough of those movies. I own a few, and it's something that the further I dive into, the bigger it is. So I want to explore it more and more. Just kind of, that's what I've done with, science fiction or horror films and sex exploitation movies, non exploitation movies, slasher movies. So I kind of want to extend that desire to explore with the Italian Western. But what's been really cool is it's like, again, it's that same thing, tracing back that lineage of where the time frame of when a lot of these movies emerged, kind of where, different directors, obviously actors that came out of it, iconic actors, and where the genre, where it reached certain points to where there was a seismic shift, stylistically. And some of these films I've talked about so far have been from like the 40s, and the American Western is uniquely American. It the genre itself really did start in America. And since I've been really deep diving into all of this thing, I've traced it back to where the 40s, you had films that came out, and then that's kind of was the birth of the American Western. And in the 50s, it really emerged as a genre, and where John Ford, obviously probably the most popular, the most iconic director in the genre, really really did all kinds of incredible films, as well as tons of other directors. But it's interesting because the 50s was a big, huge heyday. You had the 40s, you had the 50s, which was a real kind of emergence as where the Western became a real genre. And then in the 60s was when kind of the spaghetti Western genre emerged, where the Italians were, more or less the American Western, and especially in the 50s, were very popular. Those movies were, commercially very successful. The audiences loved them, and it emerged as a fully kind of realized new genre of style, genre, or filmmaking style. And so, you know, the the Italians kind of got on board in the the mid to late '60s by directing a lot of their versions of what they basically wanted to try to capitalize more or less on what the Americans were doing and put out a lot of these spaghetti westerns. And it's been really interesting, like the time period from like the 50s, with the American westerns, and then with the 60s with the emergence of all of the spaghetti westerns and the Italian exploitation versions of those American films. Really, really cool. And also the tone of westerns where, by the late 50s, I mean, wholesome is probably not the right word, but when the genre kind of emerged in the 40s, the films were a little bit more I don't know, maybe heroic in nature. They were a little bit, to a degree, more family friendly, to a degree wholesome, I guess, if you want to say that. But by the mid to late 50s, a lot of the films and the Western genre got a lot darker. And that's one of the things why I love the Italian spaghetti westerns so much, is because they're just so brutal and they're so dark. And you see that trajectory of the films got grittier, more nasty, more raw. Um, and today's film is, without exception, it's definitely one of the most violent westerns I've ever seen. It's super dark. I mean, just an insane body count. And I had never seen this before. The Hellbinders, directed by Sergio Corbucci. And this movie, again, like I said in the beginning of the show, I probably spoke too soon. But I think that this movie is This was the best movie I've seen so far. Super gritty. It is uber violent. Like, it's crazy. When I think that this movie came out in '67, it's wild. Like, I mean, because it's brutal. It's one of the most violent movies I've seen in a while, just in general. And it's such a great story. It's basically about, it takes place at the, at kind of the tail end, more or less, of the Civil War, and it's about this, these Confederate soldiers that have this all of this money, and they are trying to, you know, rise an army again, bring back the Confederacy, and there's a scene of where they ambush these Northern soldiers and they just massacre them, and it's brutal as all hell. And these guys are just so vile and evil. Yeah, it's such a great story. It's beautifully shot. Again, it's funny because the quality of this movie on DVD is it's not great, but it starts off where I was like, wow, this might be just from the quality of it. I was like, I don't know if I can get through this. It almost seemed like it could be unwatchable. But then about 5 minutes into it, it felt like the picture kind of cleared up and the sound got better, and it was actually really good. It actually looked Hellbinders looks really great on this version. I was really impressed. But it's an intense movie. It's pretty savage, but just badass. Like a great adventure story. Um, the characters are just awesome. It's got one of the greatest endings I've seen in a while where, without giving anything away, it's like it's not a happy ending and everyone dies at the end. It's just fucking awesome. And I again, like I said, I spoke too soon when I said that I had seen, that I reached a point where I think had seen the best movie in this collection so far. But this, I have to say, this is definitely the best. I gravitate towards the darker, kind of vibe anyway, and this movie is that, and it's pretty sinister, it's pretty vile. Yeah, I can't recommend this movie enough. I would definitely buy this on Blu-ray if I get a chance. It's so kick-ass, and again, just so blown away that this came out in 1967. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy, like over 50 years ago. But I can't recommend this movie enough. It's got to be one of the most badass westerns I've seen in a really long time. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Peace.